Hi, this is Joshua Williamson, writer of Dark Crisis. Welcome to Forbidden Planet TV.
Welcome to Forbidden Planet TV. I am Andrew Sumner, and this is our old friend Joshua Williamson. How you doing, mate?
I'm doing good. I'm good. How are you?
I'm very well, man. Very well. It's always lovely to see you,
Yeah, you too.
especially when you've got such a cool thing to tell us all about, which is your new DC project, Dark Crisis. So, I guess before we get into the book itself, what's
Mhm.
been the road to creating Dark Crisis, Josh?
A few years ago, we had been talking about some ideas we had during death metal and some thoughts we were building toward, and there were certain ideas that I always kind of kept coming back around to, and a lot of them were these ideas about legacy, and then also what death meant in the DCU now, because so many heroes have died over the years that death has to mean something different for them. And so I had always had these ideas about what death and legacy meant to the DCU. And so about maybe a year and a half ago, probably more than that now, we started talking about what we were going to do after death metal. And one of the ideas I had was this story we're telling, which went from Infinite Frontier, went into the DCU. We did Justice League Incarnate. Some of the stuff we were doing in Batman and Robin and Deathstroke. I had this really big like tapestry of story I wanted to do and build to, and it all comes to a head with Dark Crisis. And it was just a lot of me pitching story to DC. There were certain things they wanted to do, certain things I wanted to do, and we sort of were able to come up with this story that we're telling. Right now this week as we're talking, Justice League 75 just came out. That's Death of the Justice League, and that's a prelude to Dark Crisis. So everything was just all kind of leading to that moment of building Dark Crisis. It's been a lot of work, a lot of conversations, a lot of phone calls, a lot of Zooms, but it's been really, really fun. And I think you'll be really surprised by what Dark Crisis is.
And what can you tell me real quick about the books that are leading into Dark Crisis?
Yeah, so last year we did a book called Infinite Frontier. It started with Infinite Frontier Zero. That was part of our big launch. That was post Death Metal, post Future State. And in that story, we did this. It was Wonder Woman and the Spectre on a journey to try and find a darkness. Like she was warned that there was going to be a cost to what happened at the end of Death Metal, and she understood that there was potentially some kind of darkness out there, and she couldn't figure out what it was. And that she thought it was okay. She was able to move on. But then we revealed that Darkseid was around. Darkseid killed the Quintessence, killed the Spectre. So ever since then, we've been building this idea that like, what was it that Darkseid was looking for, and what was it that Darkseid was obsessed with? And Darkseid is so obsessed with control, and so much of his character is always about control, right? And so we started having this idea of like, well, he was trying to control the great darkness and what that meant. And that's part of what Infinite Frontier was about, was we got to see different characters across the DCU and their takes on this sort of, very nutty big adventure that was kind of happening behind the scenes in the DCU. Part of my goal with all of this was to show parts of the DCU from points of view you haven't normally seen, right? It's like normally we do big stories like this. It's always Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, right? It's always the Justice League's point of view. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to create this threat and this danger that was out there that you would start seeing it from a different people, from like Alan Scott, Roy, and Cameron Chase, and President Superman and Thomas Wayne, like unexpected points of view to this story that we were starting to tell. And then that led into Justice League Incarnate, which followed Thomas Wayne and follow President Superman, as they were trying to find what happened to Barry Allen. Because across this whole story, Barry Allen has been missing. We know where he is, but the characters don't know where he is. And what you find out in that story is that Barry Allen had been manipulated by Darkseid into creating a crack in the multiverse. And then it was like, what's the other side of that crack? We started showing bits and pieces of that, and that's what led us to Pariah. That's what led us to the stuff with the Great Darkness. And one of my goals was to kind of tell a story that was building the DCU on a multiversal level, right? And that's what we were doing with Infinite Frontier and Incarnate. But they also wanted to tell a grounded story, and that's what was going on with Robin and Deathstroke and Batman and Shadow War. And what I was building was I was building two threats, one from above, one from below. And then the heroes are caught in the middle of those two threats. And then when those two threads collide, that's what's happening with Dark Crisis, is when those two threads we've been building finally come to a head with each other. And the first casualty of that is Justice League, the Justice League dying in Justice League 75. They find out from President Superman that this threat is building. They go to take it on and they lose, and Pariah kills them all. And now the only survivor is Black Adam. Black Adam comes back down to Earth, beaten and defeated, and basically tells all the heroes Justice League are dead. And some heroes believe it and some don't, right? Like you have some characters that are like, no, they'll be back. They're always back. You know, like this is far from over. You have some characters that really believe it, but the villains, they kind of don't care. The villains are just like, well, they're not here now, so we're going to take advantage of them. And that's where like Deathstroke and his army comes in. And really a lot of villains are sort of taking that opportunity. But there's no Justice League now because of all this. And so we get to sort of show what the DCU is like dealing with the idea that Justice League is gone and that conflict, because some people believe Justice League are dead, some people don't. And that causes a lot of conflict within the DCU.
Josh, how long have you been putting all of this kind of master plan together for? There's one thing about what the publishing route to it was, but how long have you had this in your head for, mate?
For a long time. I mean, you know, I've been really thinking about what Death and Legacy, and I've had a lot of conversations about this, about the new characters, and really about sidekicks and why the sidekicks are important. Like when you look at Marvel and DC, the things that separate them, the things that make them special, you know, one of the main things to me has always been the sidekicks and the legacy characters, right? Like we have a very generational history at DC. And I wanted to tell a story about why all those pieces matter. I wanted to tell a story about why the generational history is important and why characters like the JSA are important, but they're also just important as some of the newer characters, including, you know, you go back and you look at like Tim Drake and Bart and Connor and Cassie and Kyle Rayner, you know, go back to that era and be like, those characters, when they were new, they were important. And talking about the new characters we've had the last couple of years, even something like Jaime, like Blue Beetle, and like why he is important, right? He's a legacy character too. But to me, DC is always at its best when all those pieces are working together. When all of it is, you know, a cohesive unit, that's when DC, I think, personally works best. And so I was doing a story about that like when this great danger, this big threat comes, you have Deathstroke, you have Pariah and his Dark Army, you have all these dangerous things coming. The only way through that is for all of those pieces to work together. And that's really something I've been thinking about for a long time, is that like, it's something that's always been in my head that like, well, this only works when it's all together. Yeah. Right? Like that's when it's at its best. And so that's been in my head for a really, really long time. And we've had a lot of conversations about Death and Legacy, and I've always been very opinionated about how important the Titans are and how important Legacy and how important the sidekicks are. So all this was in my head for a while, and I think it finally started to come together maybe about 2 years ago. Like I finally started to like, okay, I think I know what I want to do here. And then definitely about, yeah, when we started working on Infinite Frontier, so that's like October, September of 2020, was really, really started coming together. I really started figuring out what I wanted to do.
It's fascinating to me, mate, because you and I have talked about the concepts of superhero legacy, superhero dynasty, superhero generations, and family before on this show, and I think it's a really interesting element of your work and of your interest as a writer, given that the DC pantheon, when you take it back to 1938, 1940, 1945, essentially all of these characters start out as orphans, because the original model is you have the isolated figure who gets these incredible powers or has these incredible powers or somehow develops them. But it's so interesting throughout you know DC's years of publishing history that in fact these incredible dynasties have been built up. And I think out of everybody working in mainstream comics today, you're one of the key people who really takes that concept and runs with it.
Yeah, I think that's what I try to do. I think, you know, I call them the families. Like they're all these families, you know, it's always funny. I think we talked about this last time, that Batman is like the solo loner, but has the biggest family in comics.
Right,
you know?
Exactly.
Right. And I think that's something special about the DCU, or those families, and those families are always growing. And I think that's a good thing. Like I want those families to continue to grow. I want the Bat family to get bigger. I want the Superman family and the Green Lantern family and the Flash family and the Wonder Woman family, you know, the Aquaman family. I want them to all get bigger, you know. Same thing with Green Arrow and Black Canary. I like when we add those characters, and I like that these mythologies grow. Like, you know, we always joke around about every once in a while you have to break it so you can rebuild it,
Yeah.
but I think it's good that we're constantly adding. We want to be additive. We want to add to the mythology, like that's how it's interesting. It's like watering a plant. It's like when we add to the mythology, we're watering that plant and we continue to grow and we'll continue to thrive. If we don't do that, that's where it starts to fall apart and it starts to, I don't want to say die, but I think that is it. Like you have to keep adding to the mythology. And that's what DC's been doing. And I feel like, again, I wanted to do a story about that like this needed to continue to grow. And that's, yeah, that's what it is to me. And I try to think about that stuff because I guess I just think about what I liked when I was a kid too, like I try to keep that in my mind of like, what did I like in the different eras of myself, right? Like when I was writing Flash, people always asked me what was my favorite Flash, who was my favorite character. And I was always like, well, when I was a kid, my favorite was Bart. And part of that was because I was a kid,
Yeah.
And then when I got into my 20s, when I was the same age as Wally was my favorite, And I've had moments where I really like Jake. I mean, I like all of them, like Jake Garrick, and I like Max Mercury, who's never been a Flash, but it was Max Mercury, like different pieces of this. But then when I got to be in my 30s, I had a bigger connection with Barry, and especially having written Barry as much, like I have a more personal connection with him than anyone else.
Yeah.
But it's like these different eras, he liked different things. And so I try to keep that in mind when I work on these books, but I try to think like, what did I like as a reader, as a fan, every once in a while that can be hard because you have to kill your darling sometimes. You have to be able to, I mean, our job most of the time is to be, it's always rough when you take on these characters, these mythological icons, right? Like when you're taking on superhero books and you love these characters, one of the absolute hard part of the job is you have to put them through hell all the time. Like you have to try to kill them, and it's like you have to be able to test them. And that's what I think a lot of what I'm doing now with Dark Crisis is about, testing them, not just testing the Justice League, but testing these new heroes, because with all these new heroes, that's the only way they ever really grow, is you have to put them through some tests. They have to go through some trials so that you can see they've earned it. They've earned to like go to the next level. And you look at some of the stuff that, again, that like Tim and Kyle and like the Young Justice characters, but then you go back and look at the Titans characters and the stuff that went on with the Teen Titans and Nightwing and like the growth of those characters. And it's like, this will sound silly, but it's like Wally is the Flash because Barry died, right? And then there was a huge trial of that character until he really stepped in fully into the role of Wally and stood out of the shadows. And that wasn't easy. That was a good amount of time between those moments. I mean, if you look at, I think there's, I think that when you get to Return of Barry Allen, that story ends in issue 79. Like, he was Flash for a while before he really stepped out of that shadow. But part of that was he had to go through those trials. And again, that's one of the hard parts about working on books like this and doing an event like this, is knowing that I have to put these characters that I love through these kinds of hardships. But I believe that on the other side of that, they will be better for it. And it's tough sometimes. And even as a fan, I look at it and I'm, oh my God, what am I doing? But, I think that the stories we're telling are important. And I have something I want to say about DC. Like when I was working on Flash, I had something I wanted to say about Barry. When I was working on Robin, I had something I wanted to say about Damian. But when I'm working here, it's something I want to say about DC. I think that's part of the differences here. But yeah, it's a lot of stuff in my head when it comes to this project. It's a lot going on. Yeah.
I think I knew you'd give a great answer to that question. And I think it's just so fascinating, the intellectual rigor that you've applied to everything you do with it. The depth of thought is apparent on the page. And before we go, Josh, what can you tell me about your co-creators on Dark Crisis?
Yeah, we should talk about Daniel. I mean, Daniel is amazing, right? Like, Justice League 75 was drawn by Rafa Sandoval and Jordi, and it looks at Matt Herms was the colorist on it, and it looks really big and really epic. Then we're doing a Dark Crisis Hero special that comes out on Free Comic Day. That has art by Jim Chung, and it is amazing. I mean, he does really great work. I mean, I think that Jim always brings very like epic energy. But then you get to Daniel, and Daniel is really stepping up. I mean, Daniel is a very thoughtful artist. He's putting a lot of pressure on himself to really bring his best. And I think when you see the stuff he's doing, it is really amazing. I mean, I talk to Daniel multiple times over the week, and he's always full of big ideas, and he pushes me and I push him. We're trying to just make this the best we can. And Daniel is really, really great. And I'm very excited for people to see what Daniel is doing. Like Daniel and Alex, like they are doing amazing work on this. And then we have Tom who's doing the letters for it. And Tom, I've worked with Tom a few times over the years, and he's been the letterer since Infinite Frontier. Like he did Infinite Frontier, the series, and then he did just like Incarnate. Now he's doing this, and he just always goes for it as well. And with Dark Crisis, I think I'm very curious what they're going to think about it, because I don't think it's going to be what people expect. Like I always hear these things of like, oh, this story is about replacing the classic heroes with new heroes, and I'm always like, it's not about that at all. It's really a story about all of these pieces of the DCU and why all of these pieces are important. And when you look at the art that Daniel is doing, and he's really putting a lot into that idea, like you'll get to see why, no one character is more important than the others. You can really feel like everybody has a place in the DCU, and everything is really big and epic. Daniel's a big part of that.
Mate, I think that is a brilliant testament to Daniel, and a lovely and intriguing place to end on. So everybody who's watching this conversation, you can order Dark Crisis from the links attached to our conversation. Mm-hmm. I cannot wait to read it, mate. I'm massively excited, and it's always great to chat with you about your DC work, mate. I'm really looking forward to seeing this one, and I'm sure everybody tuning in feels exactly the same way. So the best of luck with it. Luck you're not going to need, because I know it's going to be awesome.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And everyone, please, pre-order with Forbidden Planet. And thank you so much for listening.
If you're enjoying watching Forbidden Planet TV, and you're enjoying watching us talk to the world's most interesting and accomplished filmmakers, authors, artists, musicians, creators, subscribe right here. See you soon.